Hi guys, this is Furqan Mohammed. I am a amateur photographer. I classify myself as a landscape photographer. Making this video to kind of share with you guys like what I have in terms of lenses, the set of lenses that I use to take my pictures. I very strongly believe in sharp images uh, that are usually and almost always taken by a sharper glass. I think that the sharper glass translates into a sharper image. And I was a Nikon shooter. I felt that to buy higher quality lenses, I have to pay more and more, but the sharpness is still was kind of a little bit lagging behind when compared to Canon and other companies. Then I saw the Sony came in the market, like being coming up with the new collection of lenses that were extremely sharp, and I felt like that I need to switch myself from a Nikon shooter to a Sony shooter because they seems to have a little better technology. A lot of other companies like Sigma was coming out with more Sony lenses, and um, so I decided to switch from Nikon to Sony, and I'm very happy about it. I have my source of most of this information is come from DxOMark, and I feel the DxOMark is kind of like slow to produce or test new lenses that are coming out in the market, um, whatever reasons. And my second main source that I really enjoy watching is the Christopher Frost. He is I think, an amazing reviewer for sharp glass. So anytime I buy something, I watch his videos very carefully and see what he has come up with and what kind of glass that he has tested. My I classify, as I said earlier, I classify myself as a landscape shooter, and I'm gonna go by what I feel I will more likely to use, and and it's a sharp lens. If you're a prime shooter, there's two lenses that I feel that you must have. One of them, my favorite lens is a 24 millimeter G Master lens 1.4. That is a lens every Sony shooter must have. This is the lens actually I'm recording my video with, and it's extremely sharp lens, and it has a very good autofocus. I think the only one lens that kind of beats it in terms of sharpness, I would call it like 135 GM lens 1.8, is this lens right here. Is this lens is amazingly sharp, but and the sharpest lens I have ever used. And I think the only problem with that lens is the usability. It's not a very usable lens. When are you going to, how much you shoot, how much, depends on your style. If you are a portrait photographer, maybe you can use it, but for anybody else who classifies themselves outside of portrait photography, I think will have a difficult time using it. Also, you need a lot more space to take images with that 135 millimeter G Master 1.8. You probably won't be able to shoot in a smaller room or small narrow spaces. I would call it more like an outdoor setting where you're trying to get a little bit environmental effect plus a portrait together. So, but it's by far is one of the best looking lens out there. It's got a very large glass element, and I think I would love to keep this, but unfortunately I'm gonna have to let it go because I have a very little use of it, so I'm planning to sell it anytime soon. So as I said, the best lens I would call is 24 millimeter 1.4. Will be if you're a landscape shooter and you or do some street photography. Also, it's a good lens to shoot portrait for multiple people in a frame. Very tack sharp. It will be able to focus, different multiple people in a frame. So I used it recently on a birthday party, and it just completely changed my view about this lens. That how diverse this lens is. The second lens, I would say, is my favorite, and I think is the most. The image quality and the character of the images is amazing. Is with this 50 millimeter f1.4 Zeiss, made by Zeiss. It's a Sony lens made by Zeiss. I think this lens is mostly used when you're talking about a camera with one lens that you can go around and take pictures of people. That's what you want. In a birthday party or in a wedding, this is the lens that you need. And obviously you will need to supplement it with a portrait lens, 85 millimeter 1.8 or 1.4 if you want to spend a little more money. Very sharp, beautiful lens as well. That's what I can probably can talk about it now. This is rather an inexpensive lens, and it's a beautiful lens, I would say. If you look into very lightweight, but if you are looking to shoot like portraits, it's a good lens. There's a big gap between this one and 1.4 G Master. If you're a professional portrait photographer, I think I'll give a more weight to that lens instead. Um, um, it can probably act a little more like this 50 millimeter 1.4 lens. And then if you're on a budget for that 50 millimeter 1.4 and want something lighter, and you want to carry that with you all the time, and also if you're a hiker or landscape shooter, if you have to choose between 50 millimeter 1.4 versus this 55 millimeter 1.8, I'll go with 55 millimeter 1.8. This is a very beautiful lens, very small, very compact, very beautiful lens. But again, if you have to choose between quality between the two, I've shot with both of them. I'll tell you the 50 millimeter 1.4 is the lens that you want to have. If the weight is not your primary, if weight is not going to be an issue for you. The next one that I would like to discuss is probably I have told you already about 24 millimeters, by far my favorite lens. And then the next one up is a 50 millimeter 1.4, is very good lens, very, very good lens. So between the two, these primes, it will give you a wide range. And then we talk about 55 millimeter 1.8 lens is being a little bit more lighter, give you a pretty good image quality and the sharpness, but not as good as 1.4. All right, so I think I have talked about mostly all the prime lenses that I own. I think, and the last one was the 135 that I talked about earlier, the Sharpest lens, the Sony lineup of lenses. The next one that I would like to talk about is a very good lens if you want to own just one Sharpest zoom lens I wouldn't call it the sharpest zoom lens. I would call it between wide angle sharpest zoom lens. Then you're looking at this lens 16 to 35 f 2.8. This is a beautiful G Master lens, and I think the reason I like this lens over that f4, I understand the f4 is a lighter lens compared to this 2.8, but here's a key factor. If you are going to invest a large amount of money in a lens, you rather want to have 2.8, and I'll tell you why. If you have 2.8, you can use that the larger aperture for everyday photography or portrait photography, or you can use it as in the weddings and in the birthday parties and all those situations. And then when you're ready to take that on a hike, you can still shoot those very nice sharp pictures with landscape photography with the same lens. But if you have f4 and you're trying to make a use of like a f2.8 lens, you're not gonna be able to do that. Because so you can't go other way around. If you know for sure you're not gonna take a lot of the pictures from the portrait style pictures from this wide angle lens, then and you only are a landscape shooter, then go for f4. But if you have 2.8, which is a little bit heavier than f4, but you're gonna be able to use that in both situations, that's why I would go for 2.8. And between the f4 and 2.8, most of the time a f2.8 lens is a sharper lens compared to f4. And if you look at DxOMark testing, you will see the top 10 or the top list, their top list is almost always never an f4 lens. It's always almost like a f2.8 lens or f1.4 lens. So this is my thought on this, that I would rather have a 2.8 and use that lens in both situations, where I need a little bokeh in a portrait and also want to do the landscape. The downside is a little bit of weight. That does not concern me when it comes to quality. I would rather have a little better extra sharpness, and in return I will carry an extra weight. So that's what I think I should do. The next lens that I want to talk about is this lens right here. I bought it from a friend. This is well, it's not a G Master. It's a lens 24 to 105 f4. If you are going to buy one lens and that's good and walk around with it, the best walk around lens is actually 24 to 105 if you're not worried about the aperture so much. But I have shoot with it a couple of pictures, but anytime there is we're talking about low light, you're talking about the speed, fast moving subjects, you're not gonna be able to capture with this very effectively. And I have tried this lens. That's why, I mean, there are situations where I'm carrying this lens and I want to take those pictures that are require those two elements. I've had failure. So if you are gonna be a landscape shooter and you want to walk around lens, good average walk around lens, then you can have this lens and it'll serve you good. My next lens that I think every photographer should have is this lens. It's called 70 to 200 G Master. This lens is an absolute must lens to have. You realize that you will shoot a lot of things with this sport photography. You can shoot with it like outdoor events. If you are a landscape shooter, you'll take tighter shots with this. And it's a lens that has so much usability for an average photographer that you just can't ignore it. Every time I'm trying to avoid having this lens, I had a Tamron 70 to 200, and it kind of went bad on me. It was a Nikon body, and I just couldn't do without this lens. I have missed so many events that I could have shot a 7200 with, like my kids' award ceremonies and stuff, graduations and those kind of things, birthday parties where you want to take picture of the subject that um, of people that you you want to tell the story. You don't want to be too close to them. They're not know that their pictures are being taken. They're laughing, they're talking to each other. I love that kind of photography because it kind of tells you the story that you need to tell about that event. And I think this lens tells can help you establish that where you take images of people that are interacting with each other in an event, and that tells you the story of that event. So my favorite lens after 24 millimeter 1.4 is going to be 70 to 200, and I think every photographer must have this lens. All right. As I said, I classify myself as a landscape shooter, but if you are going to look at other things that I like taking pictures of, and my second most passion is taking pictures of animals, birds, and like more like a wildlife photography. So kind of landscape hiking goes hand to hand with this wildlife, and I think this lens is a must have if you are looking into a to be a effective wildlife photographer. This is a 100 to 400 lens that is made by Sony, and this lens is so great that that one lens have actually made me switch from Nikon to Sony. I have a friend of mine who let me borrow his Sony body 7R3, and I was so impressed with the combination of that body and this lens that it has convinced me that I will become a Sony shooter, and I absolutely loved it. And I've taken such a great shots that I cannot take. I was buying a third-party lenses with Nikon. They're very heavy lenses. I had that 200 to 500 Nikon lens that was very heavy and wasn't able to do what this lens can do. It's very fast. It's very sharp, and it will serve you good. So if you are going to be a hiker and a landscape shooter, I can tell you there's these three lenses can do it all for you. You need a 15 to 35 f2.8 and 55 millimeter f1.8 and 100 to 400. Between these three lenses, you can accomplish anything. So this is why these are my sharp lenses that I wanted to really share with you. Let me know what your thoughts are. I may end up testing, go a little bit more detailed video of the ones that I really absolutely like. So let me know what you guys think.